should have. What do I banged a few people? Anyway, good afternoon. For those of you who might have just joined us late, you missed a great newspaper prediction trick earlier when I opened up the session. It'll be actually, we're recording this, so if you want to look at it, it'll be posted on the website at some point. In any case, I'm Danny Selnick, and I'm co-team leader for the National Press Club's Communicator team, and I'll be introducing our keynote in just a minute. I will be short in my remarks. I've stolen that from Robert Reich, but I'm taller than him. I trust everyone's been having a great time and has learned some important things that you can take back to your offices and use. I also trust you've connected with our speakers and others in attendance. We've heard the word trust throughout the day, and you'll hear it again from our keynote, who's going to talk, in part, about the Edelman Trust Barometer. But first, a reminder, please turn your phones to silent. And if you're going to tweet, use the hashtag #NPCLive. About today's keynote format, our speaker will first have some remarks, followed by a fireside chat that will be hosted by National Press Club President Jeff Ballou. Jeff is news editor at Al Jazeera Media Network and the 110th president of the National Press Club. Now, please allow me to introduce you to our luncheon keynote speaker. As you can imagine, we're very excited to have with us Richard Edelman, president and CEO of Edelman, one of the leading communications marketing firms with 65 cities and with more than 6,000 employees worldwide. Public relations has come a long way since the days of Richard's father, Daniel J. Edelman, Edward Bernays, and other leading figures. It used to be that public relations as a discipline fell below the rungs of advertising at many companies and organizations. Rather than maintain the status quo, Richard saw the need for change and became an industry disruptor, bringing into play digital, creative, paid media, and advisory with greater results for clients. And it's spread with such importance and results that now public relations has a seat at the C-suite table at many companies and organizations. Richard is regarded as an industry thought leader and has posted weekly to his blog since 2004. He's consistently mentioned as one of the top 25 foremost experts on corporate trust. And Richard will be discussing more about trust in his remarks. Now let me please introduce you to Richard Edelman.
Okay, so I'm not going to make Danny small jokes. So thanks for having me here today. I've been in the PR business for 39 years, hard to believe. I've actually been through many of the upheavals that you in the media in particular have experienced, the rise and now somewhat subsiding of cable television, .com boom, explosion of digital media, social media, Brexit, the election in 2016. The point is that today we live on a new battleground, which is trust. In countries around the world, people's trust has plummeted with loss of faith in democracy, capitalism, and the system. Who do you trust has become the predominant question of the time, and the answer seems to be nobody. So for 17 years, we've been doing the Trust Barometer. We started it because of the battle in Seattle in 1999. We wondered who these weird people were in NGOs, why they mattered. Turned out they were the most trusted people in global governance. We do it in 28 countries. We do it in October, November every year, and we report the results in January. And this year, we've actually registered an implosion of trust across the 4 institutions that we look at: business, government, NGOs, and media. Trust in media completely collapsed this year. Trust in government continues to evaporate. Those are the lowest 2. Business and NGOs are at a higher level. Point 2, there's a serious mass class divide. The attitudes of the mass population continue to fall. The attitudes of the elite population continue to rise. This gap is 20+ points in the US, France, the UK, and in many countries it's 15 points or more, even in countries like India that are going well economically. This profound crisis of trust has its origins in the Great Recession of 2008. The meltdown in that year really was beginning over mortgage defaults, lost jobs, failure to prosecute business leaders. But now that's metastasized into a full array of fears. And the biggest fear is of downward mobility, of loss of job to automation to outsourcing, and fear about immigrants taking your position. Society's also become profoundly more polarized along ideological and economic lines. Believe it or not, today, a majority of people in the majority of countries we survey now believe that the system is failing them, meaning that they do not have hope for their families for the future. They do not feel that resources are fairly divided. The one common demand that they have, change. So let's go institution by institution. Start with business. Dishonesty and malfeasance continue to plague business. One has to only look at the news of last week, the Weinstein Company, Deutsche Bank with mortgage fraud, Toshiba's accounting scandal. I was in Japan last week, Kobe Steel with steel that was untested for automobiles all over the world. JBS, the largest meat packer in the world, has its CEO in jail because they gave $150 million in bribes to government. Uber's CEO Travis Kalanick had to resign over charges of gender issue. Biotech startup Theranos falsified its clinical trials, went through $1 billion of startup money. Panama Papers proved tax evasion by people as famous as Lionel Messi and business moguls. NGOs historically have been the sainted institution. That's a halo that I'm drawing. Here's the story today. It's a downward slide. The perception is that for all of their good intentions, there's a lack of performance by civil society. Trust in NGOs today is at the same level as business, off substantially. NGOs are now distrusted in the 5 biggest economies of the world, the US, China, Japan, UK, and Germany. Government, here we are in the seat of government, is now the least trusted institution in the world. Incompetent, stalled, divided, partisan. The drop in government trust actually began in 2011, when in the European Union there was an inability to agree on a Greek debt bailout, and then in the United States, an inability to agree on the budget. This has metastasized also in developing markets because of corruption. South Korea, Brazil, Mexico. Government trust is now 50 points below that of business in developing markets. That is a shocking number. Shocking. The lack of trust in government goes hand in hand with lack of belief in leaders. Globally, over 2/3 of the general population has no confidence that its leaders can address their country's challenges. Credibility of CEOs is now at 35%, back to the same numbers we saw after the crash of 2009. That's not surprising. 60% of adults worldwide cannot name a single CEO. It's a class, not a person. The only name they can really name in the United States, Mark Zuckerberg. Globally, a person like yourself is twice as believable as a CEO or a government leader. That's why authority now rests with your peers or employees or friends and family. It is now horizontal, not vertical. The decline of trust in media is the big story of 2017. You all know that media has business model issues. The number of reporters in daily newsrooms is halved from year 2000. Steep declines in advertising from newspapers and magazines. I was just in China this week. 1/3 drop in newspaper advertising in the last year in China. Same pressures in China. The media is now distrusted, below 50% trust in 23 of the 28 countries we survey. That is an all-time low for what we see in our survey. It is considered to be highly politicized, the bastion of the elite, ignoring the lives of the ordinary person. The fake news problem continues. This most recent revelation of Google and fake news spreading into fact correcting is really a new low, on top of the Russian bought political ads on Facebook, et cetera. But here's one story I thought would at least marginally amuse you. During the recent Mexico City earthquake, anchors from Televisa provided a minute-by-minute coverage of the rescue of a young girl named Frida Sofia, trapped under the debris of her school. Came out 2 days later, there was no Frida Sofia. It was a name made up by soldiers. Total nonsense. But hey, made for a good story, I guess. 2/3 of people today believe in search engines more than human editors. And they create their own personal echo chambers for media. They don't read or listen to opinions that differ from their own. They are personally reinforcing based on friends and based on media they agree with. So, before you all jump out the 13th floor window, not allowed, can't do that yet. No, I understand.
Sorry. I'm a CEO too.
Just not. Don't believe him. So the question is not whether there's a problem. The question is what to do about it. So I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes giving you some ideas. Business is the one institution in which there is still some residual of belief in ability to make change. It's not great. It's only trusted by 52% of people relative to government in the 30s, media in the low 30s. But people actually today believe that business can make a profit and improve society. That's a big change in the last 5 years. Now, business has been trying to do this for some years. It started as a response to pressure from NGOs. With Nike, we worked on this in the year 2000 when activists in human rights were challenging the working conditions in supply chain. Then after that, issues on sustainability for food companies such as Mars or Starbucks. But today, business is recognizing that from marketing to production to hiring, it has to address a broader range of societal issues. Gender equality, LGBT, product creation. Why? Because the employees are the first audience. And if you don't keep your best people, you lose the talent war. Also, consumers have new expectations. Business is no longer constrained by that much touted Milton Friedman erroneous dictum, quote, "The only social responsibility of business is to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase profits." Nope. Instead, business should do what it does best, marshal resources, global reach, and step up and be the reasonable actor. Business is fast, innovative, and accountable, best able to make change on a global scale in a short amount of time. We've seen time and again that the full force of business behind a societal problem can be good for shareholders and the world. Now, business actually has to change in order to do this. First, start with clear goals, report on progress. Have the leaders act with integrity. Make sure specifically that compensation packages are fair and not excessive. Get ahead of change in the marketplace. Example, provide retraining for those at risk of losing jobs due to automation. Perfect example, truck drivers. In the next decade, you're going to have 3 million Americans put out of work who drive trucks because of autonomous vehicles. Get ahead of it, train them. Also, follow the lead of companies that are getting beyond their traditional role of economic engine and becoming actors on important issues. JP Morgan Chase helping on the revival of Detroit. Starbucks leading a coalition of companies to hire 100,000 young Americans in cities who otherwise didn't have a chance for jobs. Also, CEOs have to stand up and speak up, lead from the front. Dan Schulman at PayPal, our client, canceled his plans to move jobs to North Carolina because that legislature passed the bathroom bill. He said, not okay with me. Hamdi Olakaya of Chobani has intentionally made it HR policy to hire refugees, and they're great workers. And brands have to do their part as well. Why? Because they have marketing money to spend, and they also have connections to consumers. According to our latest Earned Brand study, 2/3 of consumers said they will only buy a brand if it stands up and speaks up on issues of the day. That's a big deal. That's something new. So, example, again, our client Unilever has a sustainable living plan. Here's something interesting. They say that they've done the easy part, the easy 1/3, which is to change their supply chain. The harder 2/3 in sustainability, persuade people to change their behavior. Take shorter showers. Use cold water wash. That's where brands really have to play the big role in marketing. And by the way, at Edelman, we're paying attention to this stuff too. We are getting close to 50-50 gender parity at senior leadership. We started at 33, we're at 41 now, going to 50. By the way, my 3 daughters are going to inherit Edelman, so I damn well better get there before the end of my tenure, or I'm toast. Toast sooner than later. Also, we've put in a very strict program for improving our spend with diverse suppliers. Minority, women, LGBTQ, among others. And we remain steadfast in our commitment. We do not work for people who sell guns, tobacco, or coal. So, okay, enough about us. Here's the big story of the day, if you journalists are listening up. I think that business has to take a bigger role. Business has to inform the public and enhance their understanding of the issues of the day. Specifically, companies have to put their dollars behind what I'm going to call collaborative journalism. The idea is to use a company's own channels to educate the broader populace on issues. Also, to be willing to involve people in a dialogue and debate about those issues. This can take several forms. One, companies have specific knowledge on topics where they are the leading tea grower in Kenya, or they are the leading manufacturer of a certain kind of plastics. Provide first-person accounts of what's going on in operations, research labs, and other kinds of areas where you have better specific product knowledge so that people are better informed about the subject area. This is something that can add to broader knowledge. Second, create a platform for customers and employees to talk openly about the company, about its brands. The ability, for example, as with Airbnb, to rate and review the business. Users can say good, bad, self-criticism, open dialogue, open field. And listen to what the customers and employees have to say and fix it. Do something positive in this regard. And also create social communities based on people's shared interests. And again, participate in the dialogue as opposed to top-down. Third, be an aggregator of commentary by bloggers, politicians, anybody else. Make it easy for people to find what they need to be informed. Fourth, business has to stop using corporate speak. The public just wants you to talk in an authentic, honest, and natural way. In short, like a human being, instead of like a machine. And last, you've got to use your channels to be accountable. Progress towards meeting business goals, changes that have to be made in order to get there. Whole Foods is a good example. Here's our goal, here's where we are, here's our problems. And just be honest about it. PepsiCo does the same thing. They have 48 goals and they track their progress on each one. That's part of collaborative journalism. Now, I want all of you in the room in journalism to make sure that you're clear. I think that collaborative journalism simply supplements mainstream media. Mainstream media is accountability journalism. Collaborative journalism is a place for open forum for discussion and a home for subject specialization. That's it. That's its remit, to help fill a void, not to substitute for accountability journalism. Now, if business is to take the lead in restoring trust, which I fundamentally believe, the PR industry has to be a key partner in that evolution. We in PR have to acknowledge that PR has contributed to society's trust problem, because too often PR has been used as a means of defense, not an instrument for constructive change. PR has to push a positive agenda to fight for the future instead of defending the past. Too much PR work is still focused on defending the old order. We have to be part of the business pivot to inform on communication, but also PR has to help advise on strategy. In order to do this, we in PR have to make changes. The first is we have to make sure that ethics and rectitude are brought back to the top of the pile for business. That it really matters how you do what you do. It's not just about making money. It's about doing it decently. Every company has to have a conscience. Every company and brand has a responsibility. That's our job, to push that forward. And also, to put the employee first among stakeholders, not the shareholder, but the employee. It's never been a more important time to build trust with the employees. I established that they are, in fact, the most credible source of information about a company. But it's also, they're the source of the future. If you don't keep them engaged, we lose the game, ultimately. Setting this positive agenda for PR, however, is all for naught if we work for companies or clients that ask us to betray the public trust. Hear this clearly. Not every client deserves representation. The perception of our industry has been badly damaged by the practices of a few firms that take on clients that are not above board and deploy the dark arts of PR. PR is basically an unregulated industry with low barriers to entry, which makes it easy for unethical behavior to go unchecked. We are not working in a court of law with a judge and an opposing counsel. We work in the court of public opinion. At the moment, it is deeply fragile out there. Most people distrust the system. And because information increasingly goes direct to the end user and is less filtered by the press, we are now more accountable than ever for what we promote and what we share. It's not just what we do, but how we do it that matters. I don't know how many of you know about a recent scandal involving the PR industry with a firm called Bell Pottinger in the United Kingdom. They ran a secret disinformation campaign in South Africa on behalf of the Gupta family to support President Zuma. It was a campaign designed to stir up racial tensions, basically saying that the goal of white-owned business was to keep its power in South Africa, and that's why they were opposing the president. The work was deemed unprofessional and unethical by the PR Trade Association in the UK. The firm was sanctioned and barred from its ranks for 5 years, and the firm is now bankrupt. But we're left with the legacy, all of us in PR, sad to say. Some PR professionals sign on to ethics or practice codes set down by membership organizations. For corporate practitioners, it's the Arthur Page Society. It's the PRSA or the IABC for agency professionals. While worthwhile, these codes differ greatly by organization, and frankly speaking, they don't safeguard ethical behavior. They can't prevent what happens in the soft underbelly of the business. This crazy quilt of PR standards no longer suffices. We have to do better. We need a set of principles that are universal, consistent, and well understood across the industry. The time has come for us to hold our people in PR accountable. So I want to propose today a 4-part set of principles. And these standards are, just to use a term, the PR Compact. And they're very easy to understand. The first one is insist on accuracy. Check the facts as if you're a journalist. Don't accept what the client tells you as being gospel. Maybe, may not be. Check your facts with third-party validators. Cite sources in your material. And if it's wrong, and if you put it up wrongly, change it and make a note. Second, demand transparency. Press clients to disclose their financial interests in advocacy programs, reveal their role in coalitions, advocate for laws that require more transparency, such as reporting on non-financial metrics in the supply chain and hiring, etc. Third, exchange ideas freely. Create platforms that encourage and empower informed public discourse. Telling both sides of the story. In other words, PR moves from advocate to educator. And this will benefit the broader society. Finally, require that everyone in our business take some sort of online ethics training. We need this to be free. We need this to be accessible to all in the same way that Khan Academy is for students. But it needs to be done so that people understand what the bar is. And to implement these standards, I would suggest a coalition led by the Arthur Page Society for the corporate side and the PR Council for the agencies plus PRSA to serve as an industry watchdog to enforce the compact. I'm not wedded to these 4 ideas. These are just a start. But the point is, we've got to ensure a standard of practice. And the PR compact will thereby enable us to have an important role in guiding business forward. And it's how we're going to be able to fight for the future and advance our most important goal, which is a better informed populace. So, today I've told you about the profound crisis of trust. Eroding trust in institutions actually is at the point now of challenging people's belief in the basic assumptions of fairness, shared values, and opportunity. And the consequence, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing less than the unraveling of the system, as we've all observed. I've suggested today that business fill the trust void. One, by doing what it does best, which is expanding its remit from solely economic engine to change agent, to act where government is unable or unwilling, and to inform where media needs to be supplemented. The business of business is, in fact, to be part of the solution, to go beyond philanthropy and CSR to making change through business strategy, operations, and communications, specifically to put real money behind collaborative journalism, because it gives employees and consumers the voice they deserve while helping the general population understand the hows and the whys of arcane areas such as supply chain or employment practices that won't necessarily otherwise be covered anymore. PR should be a vital partner for business in this effort. Those of us in PR can help evolve company strategy, promote products, and protect reputation. But we also have to move companies from defense to offense. And we will be accepted in this only if we adopt a universal set of ethical principles. So, ladies and gentlemen, in fact, we cannot afford to fail in this effort. We have to win on the battleground that's trust. Thank you very much.
Now comes the corroboration time. Well, first of all, welcome, Richard. Thank you for coming and addressing everybody today. On the fun side, you just got back from your honeymoon.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Last night. Here we go. Time for a hand selfie.
I guess I want to take a step back on the broader issue of how you structured the trust barometer. And you set this up, 17 years ago or so? Yeah. What in your view has changed from then until, what's the most dramatic factor that has changed? What are the influence factors that were then versus the ones that happen now?
So the first big change is this mass-class divide. Wasn't so, but now it's really at crisis level. The mass population now believes it has just as good information. It believes, in fact, that the class, the elites, don't stand for them. And they also believe that they're not going to get to being an elite. They're alienated. So the mass class divide. And then also this idea of information passing horizontally instead of vertically. That peer-to-peer is much more trusted than that which you get from established sources because it's from a friend and it's close to you. So it's almost in you're almost in a defensive crouch perpetually because you just don't believe anybody.
Is this an institutional sort of faith degradation that really started? You marked from, for example, the 2008 recession. A lot of people, at least in the minds of journalists or the public mind, marked the decline of trust with Watergate. How is that? I know you weren't measuring it back then, but just sort of anecdotally, would you say it's better, same, worse than 1972, 73, 74? Or would you say it's, how would you characterize it?
I think it's a lot worse because I think it's systemic. I think, I was a kid in Watergate. You were too.
Yes, I was.
More of a kid than me even. But the fact is you could somehow blame it on individuals. And that if we changed the individuals, it would get better. And I think Ronald Reagan brought us back to a period of believing. Believing in government, even if it was a small government, it was government. And then business somehow emerged in the period up to 2008 as a force for good. And people were making a lot of money. And then, oh my God, those big companies like GM and Citibank went bankrupt. And no one was responsible, and I lost my house. People were infuriated. But then it's like a tsunami. So you had the first big wave, but then the second and third waves have been the automation and outsourcing. Automation is 4/5 of the problem. People say it's all, globalization, not so, but that's what's in their head. And then the most recent one is this demise of trust in the media. So, it's partly ideological. A lot ideological. So you were talking to me this morning about this new Morning Consult poll that came out just today. 46% of Americans believe that mainstream media makes up stories about Trump, by 46 to 35, altogether, that the stories are made up. Okay.
Not true.
Yeah, but so if you just are living in this kind of thought bubble, that's the third wave of the tsunami. So you're very shaky on your feet because you're afraid you're going to lose your job. You're sure that there's downward mobility. You're sure that the immigrants are coming into your neighborhood and changing your cultural values and whatnot. And so you're defensive and therefore aggressive in how you behave.
But those sort of cornerstone points sound very historically familiar. Mm-hmm. So is it not that the issues have changed, but the technology has changed and the ethos has changed a bit? Because when you talk about fear of immigration, that's old. When you talk about all those things you sort of checked off, they've been happening in this country for the past half century or longer.
I think Rich Levitt had a very good point about the power of images and the ability somehow to tell stories through simple and emotional as opposed to the guard that we had, which was that people read the daily paper and others and had judgment. And I think a lot of it is now just visceral, and half the people who are in sort of 15 to 30 years old are getting their news from Facebook, maybe clicking through articles, maybe it's just a photo that they share that's kind of, emotional. So that's why I'm really so interested in this idea of collaborative journalism, because if in fact, even if it only appeals to the employees, which is possible, or supply chain or whatever, at least it's a start. And if employees are able to have at least some means of talking in a credible fashion and talking in a peer-to-peer conversation, then at least that which is happening horizontally has some aspect of fact, as opposed to just speculation or visuals.
Now, you speak to this term collaborative journalism, and I want to come back to why you chose that term, because when you speak of journalism, journalists like me think,
It's
what?
journalism. It's journalism.
You know, is it because journalism is usually an independent
Yeah.
entity, an independent check on an institution, as opposed to an internal messaging or internal strategy. That's a deliberate choice in phraseology. Why not just why don't companies simply submit to interview requests to people like me? Because what you have is what we've had for the longest time is requests to interview CEOs or other senior executives, and the answer is no, no, and no, and I'll just appear in a forum and format that's safe, as opposed to you talking about standing up and speaking out and standing tall for ethics and values. Isn't it just as easy as simply answer an interview request and see what happens?
So I'd like to not think that those are binary choices. I'd like to have our clients speak to you. They should. They must continue to communicate with mainstream media and take the hard questions. And we work on several clients where the first instinct is too risky. And my response is, it's much more risky not to communicate. You're going to lose your people. You're going to lose your customers, so go talk. Also, there are subject matter areas. So, example, when we were working on the relaunch of the Samsung phones, which had a certain set of problems a year ago.
Well, kind of a disaster, actually.
Small set of problems. The key to regaining the trust of the community was actually to invite in 50 to 100 of the most passionate users to Samsung headquarters and say, here it is, here's the product, here's the battery, here's what happened.
Sure won't blow up in my face.
No, but you have to deal,
Yeah.
again, with the most passionate influencers and then the press. And so I believe that the idea of collaborative journalism is that, one, it is a platform. It is for customers, it's for employees, and it's supposed to have a journalism level of quality in the sense of both sides of the story. Look, I could have left the journalism word out. It would have been a lot less controversial for you and your colleagues.
Maybe.
I know. But I decided to put it out there because I want the aspiration not to in any way impinge on that which is accountability journalism. But it does somehow mean that the quality has to move from advocacy, promotion to both sides. That a problem has to be presented in a full way.
Well, there is one thing I was thinking about as you were sort of mapping out these principles is, how realistic is that? I mean, there are a lot of companies represented in this room, a lot of firms represented in this room. It's one thing to preach a set of principles and say, do this. It's another thing to walk back into your boardroom and say, no, that's not going to happen. How do you get from sermon to reality?
So, again, I thought about that, and I think let's just go through the component parts. So, that communication has to be fact-based and checked, and made sure that third parties sign off on it as opposed to just the client saying that this is the truth. That is just something that has to become standard, because, again, the information is going direct to the end user. So there isn't necessarily a check from media. Media can come back and check it later, but it's already out and it can get around before there's accountability. Second is to transparency. We have to be sure that there's a broad understanding of what is a company going for here, who's behind it. There can't be any kind of machinations, because otherwise it becomes the dark arts. And that was the essence of that campaign in South Africa. Totally unacceptable for PR people. Not okay.
And you had, in fact, your own company had to deal with that, and when you pivoted away from tobacco. How do you're talking about companies trying to leave dark arts legacies behind, or or controversial campaigns. What's the strategy of where you were then versus where you are now?
So, important distinction. How we practice PR is one thing, and then for whom we practice PR is another. And let's focus on the latter now. So, I think each person or each company has to make its own judgment as to what is appropriate. There's one standard that is, well, it's a legal substance, therefore we can represent it. There's another that we took, which is our employees and my family, since it's a family business, don't feel comfortable doing it anymore. And so respectfully, we will not work on it. And I think it's really important for the PR industry to take on the idea that not every client deserves representation, particularly if the ask is to do things in a way that is some way of a subterfuge and hidden interests. Not acceptable.
Even when somebody says, "Oh, I got to eat, I got to feed my family,"
Yeah.
somebody's going to, you have you may have a challenging client. Let's say if you were asked to say, "Okay, Wayne LaPierre comes up to you and says, you got to represent me 2 days, less than 24 hours after Las Vegas." What's the thinking that goes in through everybody's head here is, do I represent you? Do I make sure you stay silent? Where do I allow you to go on or be transparent or encourage you to change your message that's been for X amount of 100 years that you've been around? Or do you how do you counsel or decide to represent or not represent a client like that in a scenario like that?
I think if a client is going to sign on to change that is substantive, then consider it. And the moment that the client doesn't go along with what he or she promised, get out. Because there's a collective responsibility for those of us in the industry to watch each other's backs now. Because otherwise we're going to wind up like Wag the Dog. And that's not okay.
Think about, I want to sort of take it out in some other key flashpoint areas. I just talked about Vegas. Let's talk about our favorite. You talked about Weinstein. Harvey needs some representation. So are you going to recommend to everybody here that he's on his own, or are you going to say somebody's got to take him and allegedly try to navigate or rehabilitate his image?
I think Harvey Weinstein is it's an important lesson for the media as well as for the PR business. And I would just say that there were media chasing that story for some period of time, and either through his cajoling, bullying, or otherwise, or threats, he prevented the stories. But again, it's a client Edelman certainly wouldn't take, and I would hope that others wouldn't either, no matter what his promises to rehabilitate or other is. I mean, this is unacceptable behavior.
I guess on a broader term, what's the strategy to have an honest conversation in the country or in the world about sexual harassment?
So, I again, as father of 3 daughters, I would just say zero tolerance on behalf of employers. Any sort of, there should be some kind of system such that there can be a anonymous hotline or other that encourages people to speak up. And anything less than that is a failing of the half of the population that deserves to be leaders, because otherwise you're going to always feel intimidated or other, and that's a loss for all of us. So, yeah.
Take us through another flashpoint, the White House versus the NFL.
So here's a perfect example of where
And you can toss ESPN in there too, since they're part of the discussion.
if you believe, as I do, that ultimately it's an employee-first universe, and that in the NFL's case, it's the players. I thought that the owners who went on the field and were with their players were smart, and that the league needed to be sensitive to how the president was, in my mind, just picking a distracting issue in order to get off of substantive stuff, and in a way surviving by getting the base behind him. And if I were the NFL, I would have said, look, and I think Goodell did, that the players had the right to speak their minds, or also to act as they did. And I think, again, an employee-first mindset when you do what you do. And Silicon Valley could learn a lot from that, by the way.
But just to spend a little more time on that, and I realize we can't spend all the time between us because there's lots of questions out here. You had two other factors there. You had the institution of the White House threatening two private employers, the NFL and ESPN. And then you had the actual issue that started all of this, police brutality, buried. So what is it that, if these sort of things come your way or come everybody else's way, what's the strategy to have a more thoughtful discussion that elevates the dialogue and doesn't put an ESPN anchor's job on the line? It doesn't make football players feel like that they're being marched out to be the disgrace of the country, and a president who decides to do whatever he does, however he does, whenever he sees fit.
The point is that the business of business today is beyond selling products, that you have a responsibility to be part of society, and if you have the privilege as the commissioner of the NFL to represent all these players, you should have not just empathy but leadership that allows the fans as well as the sponsors to understand that you are speaking on their behalf, and that you understand and have talked to the players, and that you're gonna help, not just be a bystander. You're gonna participate.
What do you talk about standing? I want to go back to the standing up and speaking out. How do you do that in an environment that, and this sort of is piggybacking off of the White House NFL thing, where the leader of the free world could bully you publicly to the point where, like in the consult poll, people don't believe what you're saying or what you're doing. How do you manage that sort of X factor strategically? So
the question in managing this specifically is whether to get into a confrontation, and I would urge that facts are better than getting into a dogfight on short form, and I would say what you have to say and get out. Don't get back into a contest. And be very clear that over a period of time, you'll keep up the fact flow, because the attention span is short on the other side of the avenue.
There are just one more, and then I'll throw it out. There are a number of other countries that have been running afoul of trust, whether it's Brazil, Venezuela, you name it. You can go throughout a number of countries, and you touched upon that in your remarks. What is, broadly speaking, where's the road back to trust in institutions that we are supposed to be not blindly loyal to, but at least count on for basic sustenance, whether it is making sure we have safe schools, safe streets, honest governance. You know, it's not just a U.S. thing; it's a global thing. So, what's the road back?
So, with government, I think it actually starts at local, with mayors. And here's where business would be smart to participate in education or other, or eco or other. For media, I read this morning that the Michael Barbaro podcast for the New York Times has something like 50 million people who are listening to it. Perfect, great. Go where the people are. Make it easy for them to get your information. Be part of the people as opposed to just the paper every day. And then for business, it's just be clear on how and why you're doing something, not just that you're doing it. And have leaders who lead and brands that speak up, as Dove does, for example, for the Campaign for Real Beauty about self-image. Take on things that matter.
Yeah, but they had to get they blew a campaign and they had to get shamed into changing it.
Actually,
it was awful.
Actually, for 12 years they've done the right stuff. So that was a little hiccup.
Some people would argue it was much bigger than a little hiccup.
What was a hiccup? I was. Anyway.
Okay,
Danny?
we're going to go to Q&A. If it's okay with everybody, and I ask permission, if we could just go, because it's 1:25, we'd like to go for 15 minutes. Is that
Whatever you
okay?
want.
Is that all right with everybody?
Great.
Who would like to ask a question? You haven't asked a question yet today. All right.
No, you can
Okay.
ask a question.
Who has?
Ask a
okay,
question.
Go ahead.
I know.
And identify
I don't mean to
yourself,
be
please.
taking over. So I kind of have
who
a
are you,
question.
first
My
of all?
name's Leslie Shedd. I'm with the National Restaurant Association.
Thanks.
So I have kind of essentially a two-parter. The first is one of the stats you said that stuck out to me was that 2/3 of consumers say they will only buy a brand if that brand stands up and speaks out for what they believe in. And my question is, when we've been doing focus groups and in my experience with campaigns, that when you get people in a room and they say that, it's really because they feel like they're supposed to say that. And we did a study recently where they were all up in arms about this policy issue or that policy issue that had to do with the restaurant industry. But when we had them cover their eyes and say, do you care more about the way restaurants treat their employees, or do you care more about your personal experience when you go into a restaurant? It was like 99% of the room said they care more about their personal experience than anything to do with restaurants. So I'm curious just specifically about that. And that kind of leads also into the dark arts question, like part that you brought up. And let me preface this by the campaign that you explained in South Africa was absolutely hideous. And I am not in any way, shape, or form excusing that. But I found through, again, with campaign work and here that whether we like it or not, as much as I'd love to be out there running like a campaign based on issues, based on ideas, based on policy, that at the end of the day, the vast majority of the American people like negative ads. It's like the Clinton adage, right? They were so tired of hearing the story, but newspaper sales were still going through the roof. So how would you, how do you try to like balance that in saying, I want to be a morally upright PR professional, but also trying to give the American public what they want? Sorry, I know that's long.
No, it's good. So I don't think necessarily that the American public always wants to have a basketball game in its information flow. I mean, we're not in politics most of the time. We're in business. And Schmidt, my colleague, said, I always believe in campaigns that you should say what the negatives are about the other candidate in a very factual way. Just say, this candidate's for choice or not for choice or whatever it is, fine. But we're not talking about politics here. We're talking about business. And I think mostly people are, the point I'm trying to make today is get an informed populace and have them stop operating on the basis of emotion and incomplete presidents and give them the opportunity to talk back to the company in a legitimate way and be listened to. And we did this for United Airlines, this thing, United Airtime. 2 years ago, the new CEO came in, and it was amazing. Like 80%, there were a lot of complaints from the employees about their pay or how they were being treated, or fine, okay, bing, 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 answer them. Like, wow, they're listening to us. Great. Now, as for your first point, look, all I can tell you, and this is more true with younger than older, they have different expectations now of companies and of brands. And they want a company to source properly or to treat its people well or pay them decently or all these things. So, yeah, they want their food warm and on time and all that, but they want to also know that, you know, it's okay to do. So, yeah.
We're still waiting for the CEO of United to come in here. He's been invited. So that goes to your
We can work on
tactics.
that.
Hi, I'm Mitch Mirovitz. I'm the chair of the PR program at the University of Maryland University College at the graduate school there. And I also happen to be the vice chair of the Universal Accreditation Board, which is part of PRSA, and its member, other participating organizations. I was really interested in your comments about ethics. And I totally agree that the 1 hour once a year computer ethics class that most people have to take in their companies is absolutely inadequate. But I am kind of curious to know what you think should go into good ethics training.
So I think we should get a serious group of journalists, PR people, corporates, and we should have a whole series of simulations.
Well, we'll do a partnership right here at the club. How about that?
We're in. But, and you too. But I feel like we should run people through cases and make sure that they, in the end, understand how and why a company made a certain choice, whether they were right or they were wrong. It's not the point. It's, you know, do you learn how to make the judgment in a framework as opposed to, Jesus, I need the billable hours, or, you know, the other kind of, hey, somebody else is doing it, or I heard that this is a really cool way to game Facebook. No, not okay. And I 1 hour a year is just farcical. So, you know, and the crazy quilt of regulation among the various component parts of the industry, again, makes it easy to game. So we really need to do this.
But isn't it easier for you because you own your company? But a lot of folks here work for other people, and they have to go back to their shops, and they have to make the ask and try to change the ethos in their respective houses.
Again, I think if the consensus of the major players in education and journalism and PR is this is the standard, then each of you who work at the Restaurant Association or other can go back to home and say, this is the standard. This is what I have to do. In the same way as the Bar Association or the AMA or other. I think that's a good idea to make a bar.
There's a question over here.
Hi, I'm Jordana with Ocean Conservancy. I want to know, do you think there's PR work that can be done for the media industry? Do journalists and newspapers and the media need PR representation, in other words?
You want that for you or for me?
So I would say desperately yes. And so in the moment, the answer by most, so Dean Baquet or Marty Barron is...
Who were here just last night.
Who are great and wonderful people, is we're going to do our job. And our job is to dig, and our job is to tell the truth, and our job is to make sure that we have informed readers. Yep, it's true. And the bosses, Robert Thompson of Dow Jones and others, are also speaking the truth when they say that Google is strangling them because it's taking 75% of the revenue of advertising and whatever. The problem is that the middle of the country, the people who may be ideologically different or other, are not in the same bubble, and ideologically or otherwise. So we're sort of missing a large swath of people. And I think, for example, the New York Times hiring of Bret Stephens was brilliant and courageous because he comes from the Wall Street Journal. He's a University of Chicago trained economics person who's very conservative. And he went on climate change, and a lot of New York Times people, including my now wife, went berserk, and I was a piece of crap, like throwing stuff. Okay, but that has to be in the New York Times. So diversity within the newsroom is really important. Diversity of color, diversity of view, age, etc. But also podcasts, again, to method. But then I do think that the journalism industry should speak up from the heartland. It's always the elites who, the big papers. Where's the Kansas City Star? Where are the smaller papers, as to setting the agenda?
Well, I mean, a lot of I would venture to say a lot of us are out there telling the truth from all over the world and in various remote parts of the country. I think I'm sorry, I forget, Elizabeth? Jordana. Sorry. I was trying to get at is whether or not we need somebody to help us sort of, it's more than, the gap between we're doing the job to message received and we applaud your job. How do you fill the gap if you actually are in those places and telling the story? Again,
I'm not your PR person, but for media, but people who revere Tom Brokaw and others who can be that bridge between people who now are alienated from mainstream media and bring them back into the home.
Well, which is why Tom is back on the air in many respects. So he's from South Dakota. And so forth. But there are other newer and younger news organizations and different platforms out there that are doing what is being discussed in this particular question, but it's not landing with this broad sort of thud of a message where we're being mistrusted by 46% of those polled.
I think, listen, I come from New York, I've spent time in Chicago, but when I go to Columbus or Omaha or others, people do feel a gap between, I know you spend time in Omaha, between there and New York or there in DC. So I think the media's got to go more to Omaha and be seen as making that a priority piece of coverage, not just the day-to-day of what's happening at 1600 Pennsylvania. It's almost as if, again, presidentials would go to those markets and make something of it. Maybe media should do that, the same thing.
Interesting. Other questions?
The last question.
Hello, my name is Sari. I'm one of the international journalists from Mongolia. So very nice to see you and happy to be here. So as you highlighted, public trust in media and leadership has been declined over the years. So, but on the other side, we had to choose our leaders. So, and what is the end goal, by doing this, all of the reports over the years?
Well, my end goal for the Trust Barometer is try to uncover trends such as the rise of peer-to-peer communication or the loss of belief in CEOs, so that companies, when they present their case, don't simply send the CEO out, who's not believed, but that they talk to their employees. And so I would hope that, for this year, this will be interesting for you, we're looking at two things in the Trust Barometer especially. One is why the demise of trust in media, and the other is, do people expect CEOs to stand up and speak up on behalf of issues as opposed to just their products or their companies. So we'll have something very interesting to unveil here February. Hopefully you'll have us back.
Oh, well, let's definitely talk about that. 4 things before we wrap up and go and move on to the next session and so forth. 1, yes, we're going to follow on in this handshake we just had.
Please.
Because we do have a National Press Club Journalism Institute, which is doing all of the things that we've been talking about. And it's very strong in that. And perhaps, we're constantly speaking up and standing up, and maybe some institutions will support that effort in many respects. And now hopefully we'll have you on the team along with us, because there are a lot of members in the room. I know, Leslie, you just joined, and Ed, who's on the board of governors. I mean, all of my members raise their hands. See, all those who haven't raised your hands, you need to get in the cool kids pool. Because we're doing some wonderful things. You know, Joan's doing great things. Ed's doing great things. Andy's on board. Danny, that's my brother from another mother out here. I love him. But in April, Rabia, Juliet, everybody's, people are jumping into the mix here, and I think we need to do more of that. So please join. I would be a bad president for not asking you to do that. Another thing, I'd like to see where we go from here on not just ethics, but helping everybody go back to the support for people going back into their shops and having the courage, not just the courage, but an institution having their back so they can actually change the dialogue and change the ethos. It's great for you, harder for some of the folks out here. Because there are people, I've noticed a young lady came up here from Twitter. How did that, where are you?
She left.
She
had
left
to go.
But it was, I mean, there are a lot of people that could be influencers in changing the dialogue. But I just want to thank you, Richard, for having the dialogue with me. You're definitely coming back.
Good man.
And we want Danny. What are we doing next?
We are done. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And really, let's give a hand to all of our speakers, our moderators, and really to Richard Edelman. Thank you again. Thank you. And to Jeff Ballou, President. Have a good afternoon. And we'll be sending out a survey. We want to know how you felt about it.